Hilchos Taruvis, Siman Sariches Se'ivav. My name is Nisan Lifshitz, and I'm your substitute for the Shulchan Aruch Yomi. Shulchan Aruch says, Kechatzi Zayis Shal Iser, Shenisari Beheter, Tzorch Shishim Chatzoi Zeise Heter Levatloi. The Shulchan Aruch tells us a very straightforward halacha that if I have only a Kechatzi Zayis of Iser, you still need the regular shear of Shishim Levatel the Iser. We know that the shear of Bittul is always Shishim, and the chiddush of the Shulchan Aruch here is even though it's less than a shear, you still need shishim. We want to remind ourselves that a chatzi shear is a machlekes amoraim. We paskin chatzi shear is osir min Torah, and therefore the chiddush of the Shulchan Aruch is not super duper because it's still an iser. But as the poskim point out, and really based on the Gemara, that we know that a chatzi shear does not have an iser malchus. It's a weaker iser. And there was a havamina that maybe the regular shear of shishim is not required. The place can point out that this is true, bain on the case of min biminoi, also by the case of min b'she'eno minoi. When you have a sugya, a case of min b'she'eno minoi, that's an iser deraisa generally, and a case of min biminoi, the requirement of shishim is always a derabanan. And the reason it's a derabanan is because the shear of shishim is based on the fact that that's the shear of ham. And when you have min b'minoi, you can never taste the food, and therefore it's always batal midraisa. Midrabanan, we'll learn about that much later on in the Shulchan Aruch. Midrabanan, you require shishim in order to equate shishim and min b'minoi bin b'she'eno minoi. In this context, the place can point out that the halacha of chatzi shear is true bein b'minoi, bein b'she'eno minoi. Sivav, Siv Zayin, beitza sheshba frayach o tipas dam shenis bashla imacherois. Shishim va'achas levato pleitosa. This is a flashback of what we learned in Siman Pei Vav about the beitza, and the Shulchan Aruch tells us as follows: that if a beitza that is usher to eat, and the Shulchan Aruch gives two examples of a beitza that is usher to eat. The two examples of the Shulchan Aruch is either a beitza sheish ba efrayach, a beitza that has a little chick developing inside it, and as we learned in Siman Pei Vav, that if I have a beitza sheish ba efrayach, that beitza is usher to eat. Why? So the Gemara in beitza, the Gemara also in Chulin, darshan, based on the fact that it looks like a sheretz, and that's why it's usher. There's a machlekes aposkim rishonim as to whether that iser is a deraisa or drabanan. So dahainu, if I have a beitza sheish ba efrayach, there's a machlekes rishonim whether that beitza is usher to eat midrabanan deraisa, but in any event, it's usher to eat. So that's one example of a beitza that is usher to eat. Another example is a beitza sheish ba tipas dam. We know Bisman Hazeh that the way they fertilize the eggs, the dam that we have in our eggs is not usher in the same way that it was back then. But generally speaking, mitzad the Shulchan Aruch, a beitza sheish ba dam is an iser deraisa to eat. There's other examples of a beitza that is usher to eat. The Shulchan Aruch does not enumerate here because it's not really the point. And that is a beitza that from a non-kosher animal. That would be a beitza that is also usher to eat, or a beitza from an avela, or a beitza from a treifa. 5 examples that I can think of that is usher to eat. Now, the point of the Shulchan Aruch is as follows: that the beitza that is sheish ba frech or tipas dam, or as you mentioned, any other example of a beitza that is usher to eat, is batal not in shishim but in shishim va'achas. Great trivial pursuit question to ask your friends. What is the one example in the entire corpus of halacha that you require 61 and not 60? This is it. This is the only, I think, the only example that you require 61 to be mivato. Now, before we go into explaining and really reminding ourselves why it is that you need 61, let's just focus on the last 2 words of the Shulchan Aruch, and that is levatel pleitosa. The Mechaber says that the requirement of 61, if I have, say, a bucket, I have a whole pot of kosher eggs, and accidentally I drop into the bucket, into my pot, a non-kosher egg, and I cook the eggs together, I'm going to need 61 eggs to mevatel the non-kosher egg. So the Mechaber says that's levato pleitosa. What does he mean with those words levato pleitosa? So the Shach says it's really based on the next siman. Tell us what the next siman says. The next siman tells us that the halacha beria. We'll learn about this in Mir Tashem in 2 days from now, probably. The halacha beria. The halacha beria tells us that there are certain items, like an egg and whole animals, that are not batal at all. They're not batal. It's why they're not batal. We'll learn about that in the next siman. But they're not batal. So if I have a whole pot of eggs that are mutter to eat, and I accidentally drop into the pot of eggs a non-kosher egg. So the Machaber is telling me I need 61. My instinct should tell me, no, I don't need 61. It's not batel at all, like it says in the next halacha. So that's what the Machaber says, levato pleitasa, meaning that in order to mevatel the egg itself, it's not batel. But the context we're discussing is the time of the egg. If the egg falls in and now I cook it, the time of that egg begins to travel throughout. That time is just regular time. And that time really should be subject to the regular laws of tam ke'ikr, that is batel b'shishim. So in that the Mechaber be mechadesh, that it's really 61 and not 60. But ein hakanami, the egg itself, you must remove the egg, throw it out, and you can't eat it. So again, if I have a pot of egg, 60 good eggs, and I drop into the bucket, into my pot of eggs, a non-kosher egg, and if I lost the egg, in fact, the whole pot is usur. But if I can identify the egg, so then I must remove the egg, and now the rest of the pot will be mutter as long as I have 61 good eggs connected it. What is the reason for this halacha of 61, such an odd halacha? So we have over here two explanations in the Rishonim. The Shach brings all this down in Siman Pei Vav. The first explanation, the Shach says, is the more standard explanation, and that is because eggs are not standardized size. We think they're standardized. They tell you there are three sizes, right? Small, medium, and large, and maybe if you're lucky, an extra large. But in fact, eggs are not all the same size. No two eggs are alike, exactly. So now if I take, let's say, I go to the store and I buy the medium eggs, and now I drop into the bucket 60 medium eggs, and now I take a non-kosher medium egg goes into there, I'll say, great, it's batel, 60 eggs, I counted, simple, right? So says the Mechaber, no. Because those eggs are not exactly the same size. If let's just say, for argument's sake, the egg that dropped in was bigger than every other egg in there, just even a little bit, you're going to end up having 59 and a half keneged the shear of Isser, and that's the reason why when you have only 60 eggs, you can't mevatel it, because in essence, 60 eggs are not necessarily the shear of shishim. So in order to get ourselves to the shear that we want, shishim, Chazal say, let's just round it up. Basically, that's all we're doing. We're rounding it up. Let's go to 61 full eggs. 61 full eggs will accomplish for us the shear of shishim that we're trying to achieve. So to repeat, according to this explanation, it's not that this is an exception to the rule of shishim, that this is exactly the rule of shishim, but the most practical way to get to the shear of shishim in a way that we will not make mistakes that we normally do, and that there's no human error. Chazal say, let's just keep it simple, 61, we're for sure going to get 60. The Rambam gives a different explanation for this halacha, and he says, in fact, this is an exception to the rule of bittul. In fact, Chazal gave it a shear of shishim v'achas specifically. It is not to try to achieve the shear of shishim, it is 61. Why? Because it's based on the halacha we referenced a few minutes ago from the next siman called Deah. The halacha Deah teaches us that if I have an egg, or any whole object for that matter, that thing is not batel, yavish b'yavish. Now, in order for us to remember that halacha, which can be forgotten, so Chazal say, take 61 in here, and that's going to ensure that you don't forget that this egg is different. Meaning, if Chazal said that this egg was the standard shear of shishim, you're just going to treat this egg like every other object under the sun. Your non-kosher chicken, your non-kosher this, and that would be terrible. That would be disastrous, because in fact the egg is not batel. So in order to remind you and to alert you of the fact that this egg stands out and is different, the lashon of the Rambam is to make a heker. So therefore, Chazal created a new shear called the shear of 61. That's the two explanations that the Shach brings down. He points out that Tosfos also seems to hold like the Rambam in the Shach's very creative way of being able to read that into Tosfos. He says the Iker sheet that he holds is really like the Dasa Rambam, even though road posts can bring down the Svara, the Svara of the other Rishonim of the different sizes. Is there a nafkamina of these two explanations? Absolutely, there's a tremendous nafkamina, says the Shach. Two nafkaminas, and it goes both ways, lahakel and lahachmir. So in one example, he says, is that let's say you crush up the eggs, not on purpose, because on purpose would be a violation of the principle called ein mevatlin iser lechatchila. Ein mevatlin iser lechatchila we'll learn about hopefully tomorrow, which means that you can't intentionally mevatel something. We mentioned that an egg is not batel because it's a beria. Berries ain't a batel. Once you crush the egg really is batel because it's no longer beria. But you can't do that biyadayim. So if you accidentally drop a non-kosher egg into a bucket of kosher eggs, it's not batel. So you'll say, great, I know what I'll do. I'll just crush it up. If I crush it up, so then it's batal. You can't do that. That's aim batal nisur lechatchila. Very, very, very relevant. Mr. Hashem will discuss this more tomorrow and the next day about bugs and vegetables and crushing them, and it's taking strawberries and trying to crush them up. That could be potentially a violation of aim batal nisur lechatchila. So in our sug, you can't do it lechatchila, but let's say accidentally, or you didn't know about it yet, and somebody crushed up the eggs. So would that become batal? So if you hold like the das of the Rambam, that the reason why you need 61 is because of the heker. Well, I don't need a hecker over here. There's no birya. The only reason why I needed 61 is to remind us that an egg ain't a batal. But over here, the egg is batal because the egg is crushed up. But if you hold like the other explanation that the reason why you need 61 is because the sizes of the eggs are not the same, well, that's true whether it's crushed up or ain't no crushed up. Another nafkamina, the Shach says that let's say I take one egg and I throw that into my cholent. So if I take the egg and throw it into my cholent, so then is it batal b'shishim v'achas or shishim? So says the Shach, that's an nafkamina of these two explanations. Because if you hold the reason is because of the sizes, I don't have a size issue. It's the egg connected the rest of the cholent. So it's the regular shear of shishim. But if you hold like the Rambam, it's because the egg is a davar choshev, it's ain't a batal, so it's ain't a batal, even cholent ain't a batal. Anywhere you go with that egg, it's always ain't a batal, and therefore it says the Shach, according to the Rambam, even if I drop my egg into a bucket full of cholent, into a pot full of cholent, the egg will become batal. Will become ain't a batal. Shish v'achas, yeah, you need shish v'achas, thank you. Okay, next halacha, siv ches. Kechal mizbatel b'tisha v'chamishim. This is a flashback, this is from this time from Basar B'cholav and Simon Tzadi, that the Shach tells us, the Mechaber tells us that a kechal in Udder is batel with 59. Fascinating. We first have the 61, and now we have 59. Great. Why do we need 59? Once again, another flashback, but let's remind ourselves, let's do good chazar. It's always a good thing to have. You don't have that oftentimes in the Shulchan Aruch. So the reason is like this, that the Shach once again brings two explanations why the Udder needs to only have 59. So the one explanation is a very simple explanation. The simple explanation is because, again, it's not an exception to the rule, it's the rule of Shishim Mamish. It's again the Shishim. So how is 59 Shishim? Very simple, says Shach. Because what are we being mevatel? If I take an udder and I throw it into my cholent, what am I being mevatel? I am not trying to mevatel the udder. I'm trying to the kachal. I'm trying to mevatel the chalav in the udder. That's what I'm trying to mevatel. I don't want the chalav, the milk that's in the udder, to now spread less than shishim throughout my cholent and now turn my cholent to the basar chalav. So what do I need? I need 60 parts keneged, not the kachal, keneged the milk in the kachal. So Chazal say min astam. They said that if I have 59 parts keneged the kachal, I will almost certainly have shishim basar keneged the chalav, because the kachal itself, the meat on the kachal, the meat of the udder, is included in the guys who are trying to mevatel the chalav. So it's everybody against the little piece of milk inside it, including the udder itself. So if I have 59 parts together with the udder keneged the milk, I'm going to have 60. So that's the one explanation the poskim say. Another explanation the Shach brings down earlier on, very important. Once again, the Rambam stands out over here. He says the reason is because the milk in the udder is only asur midrabanan. And to mevatel and isur drabanan, says the Rambam, the Shach points it out over here, you only need 59. Wow, fall off your chairs now. The Rambam seems to imply that for an isur drabanan, you only need to have the shear of 59. You do not need to have the shear of shishim. So that's a huge nafkamina, because according to the Rambam, even though it's a little sug of kachal, and I don't think that ever has happened to any of us, I've never even seen a kachal in my life, so I'm not really all that worried. But according to the Rambam, he just introduced to us a fascinating yesod that he paskins to seem to hold 59 for an isur drabanan. However, that's the segue into the Ramah. The Ramah writes, Kol isurim hanohagin bezman hazeh, kulam izbatlam b'shishim, milvad chometz b'pesach v'yayin nesech keshar, kasher nizbayr b'hilcha yisayim. Let's pause over there in the Ramah. The Ramah teaches us that all these surim bezman hazeh, the shear is a shishim. Two exceptions, he says. One exception is chometz and pesach, and the other exception is yayin nesech. Let's focus first on the rule, and then we'll discuss the exception to the rule. What is this generalization of the what?
Not Beitza and Kachal?
Well, okay, so we said that really Beitza and Kachal are also effectively Shishim, right? Even though you're right, The Beitzah needs 61, but it's effectively trying to achieve Shishim. It's just Chazal's creative way of ensuring that we have Shishim. And the same is true with Kachal, according to the first explanation, that it's in order to ensure Shishim. And it's on that point that you just said, the Shach says, the Ramah is trying to emphasize for us over here that we do not paskin like the Rambam. The Rambam's explanation of Kachal. So he's not just commenting on this fascinating sugi of Kachal that only needs 59, he's alerting us to the fact that the Rambam explains Kachal to mean that you only need 59 generally by Isurei D'Rabbanan. On that, the Ramah says, whoa, we don't go with that explanation. We go with the explanation that says that really the reason why you need 59 is it's effectively the shear of Shishim. The only reason why you need 59 is because the Kachal itself is included in the in trying to mevatel the Cholav. So, and therefore, says Ramah, the real shear of Shishim is true, Bein Bisurei D'Raisa, Bein Bisurei D'Rabbanan. That's what the Shach says the Ramah is trying to do. He's not cholik on the Chal, right, that for sure not. He's not cholik on the Chal. He's cholik on the explanation of the Kachal that is not being stated over here, the explanation of the Rambam. Okay, he gives two exceptions to the rule of 60. One of them is Chametz and Pesach, and one of them is Yayin Nesach. Chametz and Pesach, we know exactly what that means. No explanations. That's Batu B'Mashu. Yayin Nesach in this context refers to Yayin Nesach Mamish, meaning Yayin Nesach of Avodah Zorah. What about what we call Stam Yainam, which is really more prevalent? I don't know if I've ever come across Yayin Nesach. Yayin Nesach, I mean, that would be, I don't know, go to India, I don't know where they do these things. I have no idea. But they exist somewhere in the world. Never come across it in my life. But what about Stam Yainam, which is very prevalent all over the market, is Stam Yainam, everywhere you go is Stam Yainam. So, and that, we'll learn about that much later on, the Ramah Paskins, you actually only need Shishim. So when the Ramah says Yayin Nesach, it means Mamish Yayin Nesach. The Shach points out that there are other examples that require Batu B'Mashu. One of them is Tevel, Truma. Those things we're not so bothered with because those are only nohig in Eretz Yisrael. Baruch Hashem, we're zoichet to live in Eretz Kedusha, so we're familiar with these things and they are relevant for us. But the Ramah, who is primarily focused on writing for Bnei Chutz La'aretz, it's not relevant, so therefore he left it out. But the Shach says, fine, fair enough. But what about Orla? Orla is relevant in Chutz La'aretz. So it's not really clear, the Rashach, why the Ramah left it out. And at the end of the day, it's not so clear why the Ramah left it out. He says maybe because Ein Lanu Asek Bahem. What does that mean, Ein Lanu Asek Bahem? We can have Orla, Manazeh, even Chutz La'aretz. So it's not really clear why the Ramah left it out. But anyway, the main point of this Ramah is not to focus on the exceptions. As I mentioned, the main focus of the Ramah was to focus on the rule and is to emphasize to us that the shear of Shishim is true, Bein Bisurei D'Rabbanan and Bein Bisurei D'Oraisa. Okay, let's go onwards in the Ramah. Another very, very important halacha of the Ramah. Ubelvad she'isser eino noisein tam b'kedera, aval im noisein tam b'oise kedera, hu aser mitzad atzmai afilu bi'elef loy bato, Kozman shemargishin taimoi. Ramah says that this halacha of Shishim is only true if you don't taste it. If you do taste it, it's ain't a bottle. Right? So right before Shabbos, putting together the cholent, and then whoops, accidentally a piece of Parmesan cheese pops into the cholent. No problem, a little piece of Parmesan cheese, this is about this little thing, can egg your entire cholent. It's for sure bottle b'shishim. Go ahead, take your cholent. I don't know if anyone would actually do that, obviously, but even a little scared. But okay, maybe you would, maybe I don't know, maybe, So anyway, so fine, bottle b'shishim. Next morning, everybody comes home from shul, sits down to eat. This is the most delicious cholent ever, mommy. So the father says, that's it, nobody's going to eat any cholent today, right? What do we do wrong? So you enjoy the cholent too much. So what's the reason? Because now you can margish tam. Obviously, there's something different about this cholent. There's Parmesan cheese. Now, nobody can tell that there's Parmesan cheese in there, but everybody can tell there's something different about the cholent this week, and therefore it will become usher. That's what the Ramah in effect is saying. So even though you have a shear called shishim, it's balta b'shishim, that's only a hashara, that's only minastam. But if it works, but if you know it doesn't work, it's ein a batal. Now, very important point. Is this a drabanan or a deraisa? So the Pri Chadash says that this is a deraisa, meaning it's an isser deraisa. And that's the more intuitive explanation, meaning the Pri Chadash tells us that the whole halacha of shishim is a just an estimate of what usually is true. Chazal are saying min hastam that you can't taste something beyond shishim. So therefore you don't need to taste it. And we learned a few days ago by the sugya of kfela that you could be makel with a kfela according to the Machlokes Machaber Ramah. The Ramah is saying, but conceptually everybody holds that if you can taste it, right, or if you can have a taster not taste the food, it's balta less than shishim because everything is dependent on the taste. So this is the same halacha, but the other direction, being machmir. Even if it's above shishim, if I could taste it, it's ain't a batal. Simple as that. That's the way the Pri Chadash understands it. Comes along Pri Megadim, he's Meramis to it here, speaks about it in the Psicha Koleles, and he says that not true. Shishim works midaraisa, and therefore if I have anything beyond shishim, even though I could taste it, it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan. How is that? So the Pri Megadim says something very fascinating. He says, the whole halacha of tam is a chiddush, it's the halacha called tam ki'ikr. So he says that the halacha tam ki'ikr is only true less than shishim. Beyond shishim, even though I can taste it, it's what's called a tam kolush. It's a weak taste. And that weak taste does not have the chiddush called tam ki'ikr. So Chazal shir of shishim is an absolute shir. To be honest with you, it's a lot more comforting knowing that Pri Megadim, because you're like well protected of Chazal. According to Pri Chadash, okay, it's basic, you're supposed to have that. It's not good for the OCD people. It's not good for your anxiety. Because you're always like, I don't know, maybe I could taste it, right? So according to the Pri Megadim, it's no. It's always going to work midaraisa. The shayla more midrabanan. Okay, we'll finish up over here. The Kitzer. The Mechaber then concludes, "V'chein melach v'tavlin b'dvarim davidi l'taima imasur machmas atzman ein v'teilu mashishim." The Ramah tells us that if I have melach or tavlin, those things will never become batal. That's the Gemara in Beitz, the Gemara in Chulin, the Gemara in Beitz discussing the case of Isra Tchumim, and the Ramah says, therefore, these things will never become batal for the same exact principle, because the melach and tavlin, you can always taste them, generally speaking, and therefore there ain't no batal. Now the Ramah over here is machalek between things that are machmas asman and eino machmas asman. But kitzer, what that means is, if I have salt that is in itself aser, meaning it's a avodah zara, or the Ramah brings that maybe the shachs maybe it's orla, or it's not true by salt, okay? But by tavlin you can have that. Also the Gemara in Chulin about Isra Tchumim, it's aser machmas masman. Then it's a lachol. But if it's only aser machmas davar acher, I take my salt and it got the absorption of taste from chazir, and now I drop that salt into my cholent, so then it's not stronger than the chazir itself, and therefore it is batal.